Hi there. Thank you guys so much for your patience. I know we're running a few minutes behind, but we're ready to start the conversation. Um, Tonight, we're going to talk about the latest in colorectal cancer trials, what to know, what to ask. We're going to hear from some experts in the field, and then we're going to hear from some amazing patient advocates that have participated in clinical trials. And I'm really, really excited. Tonight's discussion is hosted by the patient story. I'm going to give you a little bit of information for those of you who are not familiar with the patient story. It is a platform where you can find hope, guidance, and supportive communities, explore insights on navigating life after cancer diagnosis, discover promising treatments, and connect with people who truly understand what you're experiencing. And so I'm going to be your moderator tonight. My name is Allison Rosen. I am a stage 2 colorectal cancer survivor and very, very passionate advocate. I've worked in the field of oncology for about 17 years and went through colorectal cancer 10 years ago and have been an advocate ever since I was in remission. So I'm very, very excited to introduce the partners that helped make this happen. We first have the Colorectal Cancer Alliance, then the Colon Cancer Coalition, and then ColonTown. I'm going to give you a little bit more information quickly about these 3 organizations in case you're not familiar, because they're all amazing. And I've had the opportunity to volunteer with each and every one of them in one shape or size. So the Colorectal Cancer Alliance is, its mission is to empower a nation of allies who work with us to provide support for patients and families, caregivers and survivors. Their goal is to raise awareness of preventative measures and inspire efforts to fund critical research. Then we have the Colon Cancer Coalition, and their mission is to improve health outcomes by reducing barriers to complete colorectal cancer screening and educating the public to advocate for their own health through tailored, local, and grassroots solutions. And finally, we have ColonTown. It's an online community of more than 120 secret groups on Facebook, providing education and peer support for colorectal cancer patients, survivors, and care partners on every aspect of living with colorectal cancer and beyond, including clinical trial understanding and experiences. ColonTown has an amazing university that's a public education resource with content created by patients and caregivers for patients and caregivers. And it's a library of original content, where experts talk about things, including things on topics that we're going to talk about today, clinical trials. So you all probably are here for various reasons, but the purpose of the conversation tonight is to have a conversation, really. We want to humanize colorectal cancer clinical trials by hearing from people who have been through them and are now dedicated to advocate for others. And we're also going to answer facts, questions, break myths that surround clinical trials in general, but especially colorectal cancer clinical trials. So now, without further ado, I'm going to have them introduce, but I'm going to slowly introduce our amazing panelists for tonight. So first we have David Fenstermacher. And David, will you introduce yourself? Oh, you're on mute.
Sorry, my dogs are barking. Hi, I'm the Senior Director of Research and Medical Affairs with the Colorectal Cancer Alliance. My role is to oversee our grant portfolio, which is CRIS for Life. I also work with the community to develop some patients-focused projects around biomarkers and equity. And the other thing is that's in my purview is a national survey, which we will be releasing later this year for colorectal cancer patients and caregivers. So I hope everyone will also check that out and take it. So nice to be here.
Great. Well, we will dive in the conversation about some of those things a little bit later. But next, Dr. Andrea Cercek, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Andrea Cercek. I'm a medical oncologist at Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center, and I'm obviously very passionate about clinical trials and the hope for the future that they give us. So I'm excited to be here today.
Thank you so much for joining us. We're really excited to have your expertise as a part of this discussion. Next, we have our first CRC advocate, Kelly Spill, and Kelly is joined by an amazing special guest.
Yes, I have Maya here. I'm Kelly. And I was diagnosed at age 28 with stage 3 colorectal cancer. At that time, I had an ulcerated 5 centimeter tumor, and I received 9 infusions of immunotherapy from March to August 2020, and then I was declared in remission that same August.
Awesome. Thank you, Kelly. And I know we're going to dive into your story more as well. But our last panelist or person that's going to be a part of the discussion, another amazing colorectal cancer advocate, Julie Clauer.
Hi, everyone. I am Julie Clauer. I am a stage 4 colorectal cancer patient. I was diagnosed stage 4 in March of 2018 with liver mets. And since then, I've had cancer jump throughout pretty much everywhere, lung, liver, lymph nodes, bone, everywhere. So I've had active disease the whole 5 years and started participating in a clinical trial in July of 2020 and was on it for 2.5 years, and it completely changed the trajectory of my disease. And I might actually in 2 weeks have my first no evidence of disease scans. So we're hoping that after all these years, I'm finally net.
You will have to update this group and all of us when you find out that information. So thank you so much for sharing. And I'm very, very excited about this conversation because it's such an important conversation. So we're going to hit the ground running. We're going to start and talk a little bit about clinical trials 101. People have all sorts of knowledge about clinical trials, little, a lot when they go in. So we want to ask Dr. Cercek to start. When we talk about clinical trials, there are a lot of sort of misconceptions. What are some misconceptions you've heard? I know one that I've heard that people reach out to me as an advocate saying they think clinical trials are a last resort only for the very sickest patients, but they aren't, are they?
No, definitely not. Clinical trials come kind of basically in all shapes and sizes and in all stages. And so that's a really, really important point because, that's often what people feel is like, well, it's last resort and I'm a guinea pig and why should I really do this? Will this really matter at that point? But in fact, our trials happen in early stage disease, which we'll hear from Kelly. They can be as a first line treatment, meaning as a first time treatment. When someone is first diagnosed, even with advanced disease, where the goal of the trial really is like, okay, we do a decent job, but how can we improve this by maybe with adding a new medication to a standard treatment or changing the medications completely based on data from studies in advanced disease. So it's important to run these trials in all stages to really find out which drugs work and at what stage they work best to help patients. So that's a really, really important point, Allison, that we really need to kind of distill, because it's critical for people to think about clinical trials, to consider clinical trials, because that's really what helps move science forward. That's really what makes advances. Even all the drugs that we have now were at one point in a clinical trial and had to be tested in people in order to get that approval. We have super strict approvals in the US and in Europe, actually really everywhere for, all drugs, but especially for oncology drugs. And then that's how we get their approval is through clinical trials.
I think that last point is one of the things that most people have no idea about. So thanks so much for sharing that sort of misconception and a little bit more understanding of clinical trials in general, all different stages, all different shapes, all different sizes. So David, I want to ask you a question. You speak to patients all the time, you interact. What are some of the questions and misconceptions about clinical trials that you hear? We heard about one about last resort. Is there anything else you'd want to add that there are misconceptions that you hear?
Oh, yeah. The one I hear probably the most is patients are afraid if they go on a clinical trial, they're going to be given a placebo. And in oncology, that is not true. In other diseases, that can be true. But in oncology, the care that you would get would be the standard of care for your disease at your particular stage, and also depending on your biomarker status. So that's really important to understand that. But there's all sorts of concerns that patients have from, how do I find a trial to, is there a trial near me? What are the costs of a trial and who pays for the different aspects of that? If you participate, how is that going to alter the fact, the schedule when you have to go to the doctor or the site where the clinical trial is being conducted? And, do you need more tests? Do you need more just more tests, more imaging, that sort of thing. And so it's really, I think a lot of people don't truly understand it. When you go in, it's a very regimented thing. You will learn exactly what's going to happen. And you can ask questions of your doctor so that you can understand exactly what you're getting yourself into by possibly participating in a trial. And it's totally, everything is your decision. And you can withdraw from a clinical trial at any time. So, this is really about you and the care that you can get through these new therapies or new combinations that are being developed.
This is great information. And I think some of those questions we'll dive a little bit deeper in, because I know I get asked if someone is in North Carolina and they want to come to Houston for a trial, they want to go to New York for a trial, they want to go where the trial that's best for them. They want to know about cost, lodging, parenting, all the different things. And I know later we're going to talk a little bit about some resources, but I want to humanize the clinical trial a little bit now. We've talked a little bit about basics, and I would assume most people, at least joining tonight, and if they don't know exactly what a clinical trial is, we'll talk a little bit more about that. But I want to allow Kelly and Julie to sort of tell a little bit more about their story. So we're going to start with Kelly. We want to hear more about your clinical trial experience. After your diagnosis, what were your first treatment options, and how did you end up hearing about clinical trials? Did your doctor actually bring this up? Did you bring it up?
Yeah, so my original treatment option was chemo, and then chemo and radiation, and then surgery, which would have led me to having a colostomy bag for the rest of my life, and also most likely not being able to carry another baby again. I didn't know anything about clinical trials prior to this at all. I'm actually still learning to this day, and it's very exciting to learn now that I'm in remission. So I'm in a big learning era right now. But I thankfully had a research nurse come into my room right before we were about to make an appointment to start chemo. And I was at the time going to Memorial Sloan Kettering. And I do want to say, if I didn't go there, I would have never known about this clinical trial. It was my first stop shop. I was planning on checking out a couple cancer centers at the time. And once I hit Sloan, I felt like I was at home. I felt like a family member there. I felt very comfortable. And they were very informative with everything that was going on and that I needed to know. So thankfully, I had a research nurse come in, and she basically said, we may have another option for you. Would you like to hear it? And I said, of course I want to hear another option. Yeah. And I had this other option specifically because my tumor type was an MMRD, so it was a mismatch repair deficient. So it allowed me to be on this clinical trial. And I weighed out my options. I had my mom with me, and I don't know what I would do without her. It was really nice having someone with me that was able to understand what I was being told. Being so sick and not feeling well and just being young, I had no idea what a lot of these big words meant, and really what was going on at the time. So after I heard the pros and cons of the side effects, really, I looked at my mom and I said, should we do this? And she said, how do you feel about it? And basically mom was like, listen, you're pretty much like, you're going to be like a rat right now. You're a rat in trying to figure out if this is going to work or not. And I said, you know what? I have nothing to lose. The side effects sound a lot less, worse than chemo and radiation and surgery. Let's give it a shot. And if that didn't work for me, then we would have went back and did the chemo, radiation, and surgery. So I still had that backup option of doing that. But that was my beginnings of my story.
Thank you so much for sharing. I'm listening, and I know I've heard a little bit of it before, but having that caregiver there, I think, is so important. And that can be a spouse, that can be a friend, that can be someone that you trust and know. It doesn't have to be a parent. And I think we're in a nervous state and going through something very, very traumatic. So having someone else there to help guide you is so, so important. And again, I know we're going to dive a little bit deeper into your story with some other questions later, but thank you so much for sharing and letting everyone know how you came to that decision, because it's personal, and hearing different viewpoints is so important for others listening, because I'm going to guess that a lot of people listening are thinking about trials or are in trials right now. So Dr. Cercek, I want to ask you a question. So you co-led the trial that Kelly was on and know her well. Can you quickly tell us a little bit more about this trial?
Yeah, absolutely. So, as Kelly mentioned, so the study is still open. It's for patients with mismatch repair deficient, so a specific subtype or genetic change in early stage rectal cancer. So normally for early stage rectal cancer, the treatment, as Kelly mentioned, is chemotherapy, radiation, and surgery. And because it's located down in the pelvis at the end of the large intestine, there's a lot of important organs there that are affected by our normal treatment, like with radiation, the ovaries, the uterus. And so people, although it's a good treatment and it's curative, people are left with a lot of toxicity from treatment, including not being able to have babies, bowel bladder dysfunction, and potentially even a permanent bag in about a third of patients or so, because of where the tumors are. So the idea of the study was to, in this subset of patients with mismatch repair deficient, or what are called MSI high tumors, to try immunotherapy. And we knew that in advanced disease, in stage 4 disease, immunotherapy works very well for mismatch repair deficient colon and rectal cancer. So, and this was, by the way, accomplished first on a clinical trial where it was the same idea, like, hey, wait a minute, I think we have a good biomarker, as David mentioned, let's try immunotherapy in stage 4. And patients were cured that were previously told best supportive care, no other treatment options. And so it worked very well in stage 4 disease. It was approved. And then our trial was specifically asking the question, well, can it work even better when the tumor is early stage, when it's localized before it spreads? And the way that we designed it, as Kelly mentioned, is that because the standard treatment was curative and was meant to cure patients, we didn't want to obviously compromise cure. So we gave immunotherapy first, watched the patients really closely, and then if the tumor didn't completely go away, they would simply jump onto the normal standard of care regimen with chemotherapy, chemoradiation, and surgery, depending on the clinical situation. But everyone would be offered kind of the complete package. But thankfully, as with Kelly, we saw that immunotherapy alone really is able to get rid of these tumors. So it's been really amazing. And now we're treating all different early stage cancers, including esophagus and stomach, that have this specific genetic change, this mismatch repair deficiency or MSI high. And as I mentioned, the rectal study is still ongoing.
Yeah, and I think that it's important to note that trial was for that specific gene, but and I know later we're going to talk about sort of what's going on right now. Are there any other trials? But it's important to know that, and it's important to know your genes and your mutations and all that, so that you can figure out what trial works best for you. So obviously talk to your doctor about that, just so that you have that knowledge. So thank you for sharing. I've listened to you speak. I've heard about your research, and now meeting Kelly and seeing the human side of it. It's just amazing. And so thank you so much for doing what you're doing and continue doing what you're doing.
Thank you.
Of course. So next we're going to move on to Julie. And Julie, we want to hear a little bit more about you and your clinical trial experience, and how did you learn about it, and how much did you know before, and sort of what are you doing as far as a trial, but to help others now?
Okay. So clinical trials is interesting because in my first appointment before I started treatment, I was told about a clinical trial. So it kind of I thought that was just what happens is you get offered, clinical trials all the time. That's just how it works. So I found out later that that's not actually how it works. So because that was kind of my intro to clinical trials, I just thought that that's kind of, again, how the system went. So at that time, I decided not to do the clinical trial. But then every time kind of I was in, in treatment, I knew with stage 4 and as extensive as the disease I had, I knew that probably the first line of treatment wasn't going to work forever, and I knew that this wasn't going to be a one-shot deal for me. So I'm a planner by nature, and so I just wanted to know what the options were before I needed them. And so that really, like, in terms of learning, it was actually when I was on a treatment, it was going well, or moving along, that I was actually did the most looking at clinical trials. And I felt like that was extremely helpful to me because you're not in a panic state. You're really looking at it very objectively. You're not, you're not making a kind of a major life decision at that point. It's kind of like browsing for a house when you don't need to buy one, right? It's a little more kind of fun and natural. And so every time I'd go into my oncologist, sometimes I'd find out about clinical trials from Colon Town. I'd, hear about something from, from another patient, or my doctor would tell me about something he was working on that was really exciting. And so we kind of dribbled the clinical trial conversation in, where I'd bring something on an appointment and just say, hey, I heard about this trial. What do you think? And just get his opinion. And so it kind of was like talking about clinical trials and learning about clinical trials 2 minutes at a time over a long period of time. So anytime I got, news of progression and I needed a treatment change, we'd already kind of have a set of what would be next. So I always wanted to have a few options. So the clinical trial I ended up going on was kind of always in that short list. And it was like, okay, we can go to this second line, or we can do this trial, or we can, do et cetera, or go do surgery. And so we kind of already had that list. So when I would come in with, the results of a scan that wasn't good, we'd say, okay, now given what we see now, are all those still options? And how do we want to move forward? And so we kind of had already made the decision before I needed the decision. So this trial was one that was kind of on the docket for a long time. And so I actually learned a lot about it. I learned how the early results were going. I learned probably almost too much about it, because by the time it was time to go on it, the trial was not looking very good in terms of the results. So from a research perspective, it didn't meet its endpoint. It was not a good trial, and as it turns out. And at the time, it looked like it was going in that direction. But I had progression, and I also was really exhausted. I'd had over 60 chemo treatments. I had over 5 open surgeries. I had multiple radiation. My body was just worn out. And so when it came time to decide what was next, I could have gone on the last line of standard care chemotherapy, a third line treatment that was available, or I had 2 trials that were in my mix. So those were kind of my 3 at the time that were exciting. So trial number 1, trial number 2, and then the standard of care. And when I went in to my doctor, we were talking about the trial that I ended up going on, and it was a better option than the standard of care option at the time for me. But we talked about the fact that it wasn't going to probably change the trajectory of my disease. I wasn't going to be cured from it. That wasn't how it was looking, but the kind of short-term stability was pretty good on it. And so I was, he said to me, you could have a chemo break. It was immunotherapy based. He's like, the toxicity is less. It could give you a few months to regroup, have a chemo break, kind of hopefully get you to stability so we could figure out what's next. So it really was intended to kind of be a bridge. But I said, okay, I think I want to do this, but we have that other trial that I'm more interested in, so I want to go talk to that PI. So he was at a different institution. I made an appointment with him, talked to him about the trial, was excited about it. And he said, but it's not open for another 6 weeks. And when I look at your counts, you're not going to be able to wait that long. So there's also an element of, you have to kind of have options, because you just don't know what will be available and what will work for you. So I said, okay, well, that's not an option. So I'm going to go with number 2. And again, I just was looking for kind of a range of stability, and I ended up on it stable for 2.5 years. It opened up like a lot, I was able to get surgery. I was actually, it was much better than stable, in my opinion, in terms of the actual results for the trial. It was stable, but I think it just goes to show that, like, you have to know what you're looking for, and also have some options. And I really think making that decision without like having the panic of trying to learn everything about it at that moment because those moments are really scary. And, having somebody else who can help talk you through it is fantastic, but also not having to have all that thrown at you at a time when you're really, really scared and trying to figure out the logistics and everything while you're in that moment, I think was key for me. So my clinical trial experience was fantastic. It well out delivered for what I wanted. I was able to then, I actually went off the trial to get surgery, which wasn't an option before I went on the trial. My side effects were significantly better. And then I also, since then, have gone on another treatment that's off label because of how I responded on the trial. It was something that kind of became an option because of how that trial did for me. So it really changed everything about my disease, but it definitely was not okay, we're looking for a cure at this time.
Awesome. Thank you for this. It's always very complicated. I think it's never okay, I'm going to do this, and then I'm going to do this, and then I'm going to do this. It's figuring out what's best for you at that time. And sometimes you might have to wait, or you might have to make a difficult choice about where to go next if one trial doesn't open for a certain amount of time. We got one question, and it's a quick question, and I want you to answer it. Someone asked, what exactly do you mean by stability? No tumor growth?
No tumor growth. So technically on a clinical trial, if you have between 30% shrinkage and 20% growth on certain tumors that they're measuring for the trial, that means stability. So technically I had stability. However, I had 29.4% shrinkage. And so I was right on the cusp. And I had 11 mets and it went down to 4. I was non-surgical, went to surgical. So, in terms of those outcomes, that's why those outcomes are so important for researchers to look at and to see the whole population and how people do to be able to move the science forward and medicine forward. But when you're an individual patient, what all that matters is what it means to you, I think.
Yeah. Thank you so much for answering that and sharing this one part of your story. And I know, again, we're going to continue the conversation and dive more in, but you can see between both of these women, their stories are different. Trials are different. They're personalized for you, your tumor, your stage, and they're happening all over the US. So there's a process, and some people might not know the process. Like, how do I find what's best for me? And what might go through the mind and the head of someone thinking about a trial. So Kelly, I'm gonna go back to you for a second and sort of ask, what was the process like for you before deciding to join the trial? Did you have any concerns? Like, what were some of the questions that you asked your doctor? And I know you brought some of this up, but is there anything else you don't want to share about that?
For my original treatment or for the actual clinical trial treatment?
For the trial.
To be honest, I was so sick sitting there that at that point I was weighing out the options of the side effects. I was so concerned about not being able to have another baby. I was so concerned about, just the radiation aspect of that. I remember sitting and listening to what I would have experienced with those side effects. My sex life would have never been the same. And all that. It really scared me. Really the radiation part scared me, and the surgery part scared me a lot more than the chemo aspect at that time. However, after hearing the side effects of this clinical trial, it kind of, to me, I just said, why wouldn't I try this? Especially knowing that I did have the backup plan of being able to go on that chemo and go on that radiation surgery plan. And my mom and I just told each other, was like, let's go for it. I haven't had experience with a lot of people in my family having cancer. I'm the only one in my family who has been diagnosed colorectal cancer, and really there's no one in my family who has cancer. So I haven't been surrounded around it. I didn't know anything. So it was more of the chance in our eyes, just, should we do it? Should we not? And now that I'm coming out of this, I want to be that advocate for this so much, because so many young people are being diagnosed colorectal cancer, and at this age, and if you don't know anyone who goes through it, you don't even know that there's even any of these options, any of these resources or anything like that. So that's mainly why I'm here too, is just because of the young aspect of just not knowing. anything.
Yeah, and you say young because you are young, and so we got a question, and we know early onset colorectal cancer is on the rise. I was an adolescent young adult patient when I was diagnosed. Kelly, it's just there's an I wouldn't say epidemic, but there's something going on. We're trying to figure out why. Not myself, but a lot of researchers and oncologists and people are trying to figure out why. So we got a question, and maybe Dr. Cercek, this would be best for you to answer. How do oncologists in young onset programs, because there are a lot of young onset programs now, proactively counsel their patients about trials, given most young onset patients are starting to want to do trials before failing second line?
Yeah, that's an important question. So I'd agree with you, first of all, Allison, that this is epidemic, I think, is actually a really good word, right? It's rising worldwide. We don't know why it's happening, but it's this steady rise that we see from year to year. So it's the tricky thing is, and the challenge is, so we opened centers dedicated to young people under the age of 50 with colorectal cancer, really for two reasons. One is for the research question, to try to get data to figure out why this is happening. And then the second is to help our patients navigate this disease from diagnosis through treatment and then into survivorship, because each stage is critically important and different, has different and unique challenges in our young patients, as everyone here is well aware. And the clinical trials piece is a really important question, but part of the issue is we believe that this disease, as best as we can tell, is the same disease once someone has it. There might be some slight nuanced differences, but in terms of sort of the treatment that we have available now, our chemotherapy, our trials, it's for all ages. There's nothing specifically for early onset colorectal cancer, because the disease, once it's present in any stage, really behaves very similarly. So, but young patients themselves, as the question asked, are more motivated. Perhaps they're more eager to kind of participate in trials and think about the next steps. I think it depends on the person very much, but I guess as a group, that's probably true. So the challenge for us is, although someone is motivated, it's not always easy to talk about trials, to offer trials, because sometimes standard of care is better, which is an important thing to acknowledge and think about too, that we do have, certain good treatments that are already accepted as standard of care. Once a trial is considered, and as Julie really nicely outlined, there's trials for every stage. So it is an important thing to keep in mind, especially with our young patients. And often I think for us, people come, as Julie did, sort of armed with saying, okay, look, I read this, or I heard this on Colon Town, or, I saw this potential trial. I went to clinicaltrials.gov and this is what I found. Can we talk about it? It's, first of all, incredibly overwhelming how many trials there are out there. So that's a challenge in and of itself. But I think it's just it's important to educate our patients, any age, but especially our young patients, in terms of, these are the biomarkers, these are the potential things that we're going to be thinking about targeting in the future. We'll talk a little bit about this later in terms of what's hot and what's, up and coming in colorectal cancer. But if someone has a specific mutation, I'll often say, listen, you have this, we're not going to think about this now, but this might be something that we'll think about a trial in the future. Or there's an exciting new trial with combination immunotherapy. We don't need it right now, but that's something that we'll think about. And so the challenge is always, I'm ready now. And oftentimes I'll tell you, listen, you're in a really good spot. You don't need anything right now because we don't have anything. The chemo that you're on is actually working. Once, of course, we see that it's not working, then we think about, what are the next steps. But I think the most important and the succinct answer is just to really keep an open line of communication at every point, certainly at every scan, as much as possible at every visit, to make sure that the patient, the caregivers, everyone is informed that these are the possibilities that we might be thinking about at some point.
Yeah, I mean, having the open line of communication is huge, and trust, and patients can do their research, but also, the doctors and trusting their oncologists need to also, again, shared decision making. It's about what's best at that time, and younger people, yeah, we might be eager, but we got to trust in the process. And you brought up a good point about trials and finding them. And so I think the next question I want David to answer is something that we got in ahead of time from a patient. How do you get started on a trial and or find trials and register? How often should a patient be searching?
I'm on mute again. Yeah, those are really good questions. So clinicaltrials.gov was just brought up. That is a website run by the government that lists all clinical trials that are available. That can be a little bit undaunting to navigate through. It's a fairly complicated site, but certainly that's the place where you're going to get the most. And you just have to use different search strategy to get there. But there are tools out there that you can use. You don't have to necessarily do it yourself. We have a system called Blue HQ. That's at bluehq.org. It's basically a patient portal that allows you to learn more about your disease, especially if you understand your biomarkers. But part of that also, we have a trial finder embedded called Leal Health that allows, basically you can put data in there and they will try to match you with a clinical trial. The other thing is, I worked at several comprehensive cancer centers, and each of the cancer centers themselves will have a site on their website about what clinical trials are available at that particular site. So there's a wealth of tools on the internet that can help you find a trial. But it's really, I think, more about making sure you're finding the right trial, and it also is going to fit your lifestyle as far as travel or anything else that you would have to do. So
the great answer and great information, but I want you to expand a little bit more, because we got another question before this asked about, does insurance cover clinical trials? How does one pay? So we really want you to talk a little bit more. And I know Blue HQ is an amazing resource. Can we find information about costs, insurance, travel, childcare? Because so oftentimes people can't just pick up and go, yes, there might be a trial down the street from them, but there might be, the best trial might be 500 miles away from them or 1,000 miles away from them.
That's correct. And, there are some things that are covered by the sponsor of the clinical trial. So certainly the study drug is covered. Any lab tests that are related to any endpoints that aren't maybe the primary endpoint. So research purposes, so they maybe can find a biomarker that goes along with this particular therapy. Those are paid by the sponsor. Any extra x-rays or imaging, anything like that, that the sponsor would ask to be done so that they can be monitoring the response to the therapy on the clinical trial very closely. That would also be covered by the sponsors. But anything else, pretty much, the doctor's visits, the hospital stays, regular lab tests, regular imaging that would be part of standard of care, your insurance would pay for. Now, some of the sponsors do provide some support for things such as transportation, housing, food, and childcare. Plus, there are other resources like the Colorectal Cancer Alliance, where we also have resources where we can help patients with some of these financial toxicity needs. So, and we also have, also at the Alliance, we have navigators that can help you get through this process, not just of finding a clinical trial, but also then navigating how you can participate in a clinical trial based on some of the challenges that you are having. And there are people out there to help, and the Alliance is there to help you. Again, bluehq.org, and we also have a phone number.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing that. I mean, I think you shouldn't let cost or fear or other things stop you from investigating and thinking about trials. So Julie, we're gonna go back to you and what you shared earlier real quick, because we got a question from our audience, whatever you call, or the people listening and interacting right now. So someone wanted you to talk a little bit more about your goal of stability from the trial. Everyone wants to be cured, and it's hard not to be stuck on getting to a cure. How do you change your goal to stability? Like what was that like?
So I think it depends a lot on where you are in your care, right? And so every point that changes. But I would say overall, right, the long-term goal and the desire is always is always cure. I think everybody who has cancer, right? Yeah, if you can cure me, great. But when you look at kind of where I was in treatment, I was on third, fourth-ish line, depending on how you feel about re-challenges. I was, my body was very depleted. My blood count numbers weren't doing so good. My platelets were low. I was kind of in this place where my body wasn't necessarily in a healthy spot. And you have to be healthy enough to do trials. So one of the reasons why I was told not to go for that, I couldn't wait 6 weeks, wasn't because the cancer was out of control. It was because I probably wouldn't be healthy enough to participate in a clinical trial. So that's another reason why not to leave them for last resort. But when you kind of are in that moment, I wasn't giving up on the idea of cure long term. I just saw it more as like a relay race. Like, for this segment, what I want is to get to stability, to be able to regroup, let my body recover a little bit so I can figure out the next step. So any given treatment, if you look at it as like a one-time treatment and you're only gonna have one shot, some cases, right, depending on where you are in your disease, you could be cured with one treatment, like Kelly was, one treatment course. Where I was in my disease, I knew it was going to be probably a series of multiple treatments. So looking at it as kind of the segments of the long race. And in this segment, what I was looking for was stability so that I could be ready for the next segment. And my goal would change then, right? Because if I'm at stability, then my goal might have been something different at the next point.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. I mean, it's, again, clinical trials are not like, yes, let's do it. Yes, no, let's not. It's a conversation and decision you make with your care team, with your friend, with your team of your parent, whoever is your caregiver, and yourself. You have to think about lots of different things, your age, location. You got to consider if you have children, if like, there's so much. It's not an easy decision. And Kelly, I want to jump to you for a sec, because you mentioned earlier, again, your mom was a part of your decision making, and you now strive to be an advocate to help others, and you are an advocate. And first of all, by sharing here, but I know you do other work sharing. And what do you want? What advice do you have for people as far as being their own best advocate when you're talking to your care team? How did you keep a diary of your side effects? Like, how do you inform your team if something might not be quite right? What advice do you have for someone that might be going through a trial right now?
Yeah, so before I started the trial, I was taking pictures of what was happening in the bathroom, because sometimes it's hard for me to describe what's going on. And so taking pictures, showing my oncologist was something that I was doing. I ended up being very close to my oncologist, my research nurse. They were calling me when pretty much like all the time. Hey, are you okay? What's going on? How are you feeling? We were pretty much in like a best friend basis. And I don't know if that's how it is in every hospital, but I was taken care of very closely, and we had a very open communication. I wasn't holding anything back. I told him how I was feeling after the first treatment, the second treatment, the third treatment, every little detail, even not just physically, but mentally, emotionally, the whole everything, because all of that plays into it. And then as a mom as well, your mind is elsewhere during days too. So I was writing down in my notes on my iPhone how I was feeling at home. I was also constipated a lot, not doing well. I remember after my I think it was my first or second treatment, I was going to the bathroom, and this is definitely TMI, but we're here in the space for it. But I couldn't stop going to the bathroom. It was the complete opposite problem that I had been having, and I was like, "Oh my God, this can't be happening. Is this supposed to be happening? What's going on?" I quickly called the research nurse, told her what was going on, and she said, that's great news. Everything is being released. So it's just, staying in contact, being honest what's going on, being honest with yourself. And if you have a question, ask it. Don't be scared. I know it's easy to be scared when you're going through something like that, but just putting everything out on the table is so important for you and for research as well.
Yeah, I agree fully with everything you said, and I didn't think about taking pictures. Like I feel like that's something in a journal can help because you go through so many things and you can't remember everything, and you only have a certain amount of time with your doctor when you're in there. So coming prepared with like that list of okay, I was constipated and I wasn't, and then this happened and this is going on, I think helps expedite that conversation and really like will help them understand and you not being thinking that you forgot something, like being as prepared as possible in that. So those are great tips. I think everyone use some of the stuff that Kelly just said. So we have 10 minutes or so left, and we're gonna shift gears a little bit to talk about the latest and greatest in clinical trials, what's going out there. You know, a lot of people go to these lovely scientific meetings. I know Dr. Cercek goes, David goes, I as a lot of advocates go as well. And so we want to know, Dr. Cercek, can you talk about the role of biomarkers? And first of all, what is a biomarker? Because a lot of people might not know, but the role of biomarkers in clinical trials and how they can guide personalized treatment.
Absolutely. So biomarker, I would say at this point is probably one of the most important pieces in terms of clinical trials and just in general treatment of colorectal cancer. And definitely in advanced disease, but even in early stage, as you know, we saw from Kelly, it's becoming increasingly more important. So a biomarker basically is a change in the tumor, like a mutation, where we have a potential drug for. So important biomarkers in colorectal cancer are things like mismatch repair deficiency or MSI, where we can use immunotherapy or we can use other combinations that are tested in clinical trials. Super important biomarkers include things like BRAF, V600Es in particular, but BRAF is good enough to remember. We've made progress with BRAF targeting in clinical trials. There's now an approved therapy, but we're trying to do better. So it's a really, really important marker in terms of treatment, in terms of trials as well. And then another one, which used to be a huge challenge actually, and is now we're really making progress and is really exciting, is KRAS or RAS. And so typically when we hear RAS mutated, we think, okay, there's a treatment that we can't use. We can't use anti-EGFR therapy, but actually now there are RAS inhibitors or RAS targeted therapies. So RAS is the biomarker, and then we have a targeted therapy for different types of KRAS. You might have heard KRAS G12C. That's kind of the new kid on the block, really exciting. We just recently had very good data in terms of responses when treating this particular type of mutation or type of biomarker in colon cancer. A newer one is G12D that's now in clinical trials. And so that's a super important thing to think about and to test. And really most importantly, and Allison, you mentioned this, but it's something that everyone should have done, you know, when they're diagnosed for start of diagnosis, so that we kind of know what the landscape is and know what we can do, even not even thinking about clinical trials, just standard of care. Another really important one that is, I think, super exciting is HER2, or what's called ERBB2. So we've heard about that a lot. We've studied that a lot in breast cancer and in stomach cancer, but now we're seeing that combinations actually work in colon cancer as well. So there are ongoing trials looking at it in advanced disease and first-line treatment. So when people are first diagnosed, why it's really important to know those biomarkers right away. But then we're also looking at it in early stage disease and rectal cancer, similar to the study that Kelly was on, but with HER2 targeting, because it is a very, very good biomarker for which we have a really good drug. So there's a number of these, you know, biomarkers that we need to know. And so what we really encourage is we encourage next generation sequencing of the tumor, know the mutational landscape. You can do it from the tumor. We could even do it from the blood and what's called circulating tumor DNA. There's lots of different ways to get it done, but super important for everyone, you know, to speak with their oncologist and have that done if you don't already know that information.
I think that point that you made right there is so important to everyone listening. You know, not everyone has the knowledge that everyone listening now does. So asking about biomarker testing, circulating tumor DNA, there's so personalized medicine is so important now. Back when I was diagnosed, it was standard of care. It was radiation, chemo, surgery, chemo. Like a lot of this was sort of on the horizon, but things have changed over the past few years in such an exciting way. So you can treat the specific mutation or the tumor of that person. So asking those questions is like one of the most important things right there. And I think, you know, even a few years ago, it was one mutation that had maybe a trial to it. So now all these, there's research ongoing, there's trials ongoing for a lot of this. So really have that conversation with your doctor. And if you don't know, if you're sitting here and you don't know, that's the first question you ask your care team tomorrow. Like send them a message, call their team, and if they haven't done it or they haven't told you about genetic testing or biomarker testing or circulating tumor DNA testing, like have that conversation, because that could change the trajectory of your whole treatment. That, you know, you can find a trial that would work for you. It might not be where you're at right now. It might be somewhere else. So that's my soapbox. And
I have to add a quick soapbox on that because I totally agree. Biomarkers are so critical. But as a vanilla girl who's wild type with no targetable mutations, not having a mutation is valuable information as well. And there's a lot of trials that are available to you too, because a lot of people will say, I don't have any of those mutations, so I'm out of luck. No, you are not, and I'm proof of that right here.
Julie, thank you for that point. That's super important. There are many, many, many studies, many drugs, many trials, many different ways of targeting colorectal cancer. So biomarker is just one of them, but not, you know, not having any being wild type. There's lots of stuff out there. There's different ways that drugs can enter the cell that have nothing to do with the mutation, that are also explored and you know, making progress. So thank you for that point. I think that's really critical. But super important just to know your mutational landscape. Even that wild type makes a big difference for standard of care too. So
yeah, I mean, I think the amount of information that's being shared here is so valuable. And I want to go back to like, so finding those trials. David, can you give a little bit more information about sort of where people can go to look for a trial? What's sort of the best website? Do they ask a medical professional? Is there like, and how do they stay on top of like the most recent trials? Some might not be on some of these websites. Like, where can people that want to research some of this information?
Yeah, again, clinicaltrials.gov is going to be the most up to date because you have to submit your protocol to clinicaltrials.gov. So that is really the place to go. As far as, you know, do you have to do it yourself? Again, no, you don't. Like I said, we use something called Leal Health that you can get through Blue HQ that allows you to enter data into their platform, and then they will try to do the trial matching for you. And of course, you know, they'll contact you if you are eligible for a trial, talk to you about, you know, where the trial is being conducted, that sort of thing, and then to see if you're interested. Again, you're just trying to find it for you if you want. As far as frequency, I'll tell you, there is so much going on right now in colorectal cancer. When you look at, you know, new types of drugs that are coming out, antibody drug conjugates is one. If you think about new immunotherapies and how do you turn cold tumors that do not respond to immunotherapies like PD-1, PD-L1 therapies, and how do you turn those into hot tumors so that they would respond then to those immunotherapeutic drugs? There's also opportunities for things such like oncological vaccines. So if you're in stage 2 or 3 and you have a resection done, there's a company that will take your tumor, sequence it, and then basically look for things called neoantigens. These are caused by mutations in the tumor. And the interesting thing here is they give you a vaccine against those most common neoantigens, so that hopefully if you grow new tumor cells after the surgery, your immune system would already be primed to take care of it. So there's all sorts of things happening. So yes, on a daily basis, there could be a new trial. But really, I think it's more important to, you know, either work with somebody, your oncologist, and let them know you're interested, and they can certainly help with trying to find the right trial for you. And if the oncologist, because not all oncologists are comfortable with clinical trials, especially in the rural parts of the country, you know, then there are resources that you can reach out to online that would allow you to keep track of it more closely. And you can work with other companies that can do clinical trial matching for you. They're on the web, so they're available.
Thank you so much. Well, does someone want to add something? Did they interrupt somebody? No. Okay. Sorry. I thought I heard something. We're at the top of the hour. We have like literally probably 30 seconds left. I want to give everyone like an opportunity, one sentence, like their top takeaway, lesson learned. And I will start with Dr. Cercek.
What I thought, sorry. I would say, the most important thing is you can be and should be your own advocate, as you've heard here from everyone. Speak up for yourself, open that line of communication, and make sure if you're having trouble, let your oncologist know. If you have questions, it's okay. There was a question about being annoying. It's not annoying. You could just ask the questions, be your own advocate, and you're in this fight together. And I think that's the most important way to think about this and to approach this disease.
Thank you. Kelly?
Very similar. Ask questions, be open. Your body best, yourself best. Coming from someone who's a big introvert, I always feel like I'm annoying people with all these questions. It's so important to ask them. And trust your gut. That's big for me too, is trust your gut.
Thank you, Kelly. David?
I would say the biggest message is really a clinical trial could be out there that is just right for you at your stage in your disease progress. Do not be afraid of the fact that it's research. These are drugs that have gone through extensive preclinical testing. And once they get into clinical trials, there is a series of clinical trials in the way they phase them so that they know all of the profiles and everything as far as side effects and that sort of thing. So, this could be the best standard of care that you could get, and keep an open mind.
Thank you. And we'll end with Julie. What is your one piece of advice?
I'd say that there's no perfect trial for everybody, right? They're all studies. They're all trying to learn. So really knowing yourself and trying to kind of have those conversations, understand what you're willing to do. Are you willing to travel? All that stuff before you need to make the decision. Because when you get to that point of having to make the decision, you don't have enough time necessarily to make the best decision you can.
Thank you, guys, so much. And thank you, everyone, for spending the last hour with us. We could have talked about this, I know, for probably 2, 3, 4 hours. But we want to have some feedback. There's going to be a survey when you're done. We want you to fill out the survey to give us feedback about the next live conversation. Do you want to see us talk about clinical trials again? Do you want us, any topic that we talked about today, do you want us to go more in depth about that? We really want to understand how to shape the next live discussion. And so once the Zoom ends, a survey will pop up. Only take a few minutes of your time. And with that, thank you for being here and listening, but thank you so much for these panelists for giving up their time and to come on here and share and educate everyone that's listening. I am grateful, and I know so many other people are grateful, and you will most certainly help save lives by being here today to share. So thank you to each and every one of you that was on the panel today.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.